So good morning, everyone. I'm Wen-Hua Kuo. I'm the convener of the committee of the special funding section under the umbrella of NCST. The title is Science, Society, and Communication. So they come from different origins. So today, this is our first time to introduce to our new scholars, promising convincing scholars that will deliver you two lectures, 40 minutes of each, talking about one of the most essential elements of our everyday life, which is water. Water actually is one of the basic elements in the Greek philosophy, and still actually is a good way to communicate individuals and the society at large. Let's say we are 70% of components of human bodies actually made of water, and also water is everywhere, including the land. We're standing at the 𝐃𝐚𝐧𝐢𝐤 which used to be a sort of muddy land in this area. So now become part of university campus. So that just should say like, well, we still have water, go underneath. So from time to time, you can see some trickling water here and there. People do not know why, but if you put some of the idea of lingerie in the annual school sense, you can find that it's very usual. The way why we just put water away, we want to control it, just to reflect how human beings want to control the environment they live, and sort of set up some agendas, maybe not that adequate to make our society sustainable. So without further ado, I would like to introduce first one of today's host, I would say, is Dr. Mu-Xing. Mu-Xing actually is a good scholar coming from engineering background and then working on governance for his PhD. And now he's a postdoc scholar at Academia Sinica. So it's very adequate for this occasion because he's also one of the active participants in our section. So let's welcome Dr. Lee, please.
Thanks, Professor Guo. Hi everyone. Welcome to this event hosted by discipline cluster of STS Science Communication, NSTC, and the library NYCU. And the convener is Professor Wen-Hua Guo. The topic of the lectures is titled of Fluid Landscape with subtitle of Water and Development from STS Perspective. Actually, I don't know the real reason why the Professor Guo invited to this event, but related to water. In the past, I was a water treatment engineer, and maybe later, Dr. Dominik will mention that water as a media, and for me, water is a media of pollution. And I have been served in New Taipei City government as a water rights examiner. So maybe Dr. Ho will mention water rights in more detail later. To introduce the first speaker, Dr. Dominik Merdes. He is a postdoctoral researcher in Department for the History of Pharmacy and Science, Braunschweig, Technische Germany. and he is visiting Institute of History and Philology, Academia Sinica, Taiwan. He studied pharmacy literature and the history of science. In his doctoral thesis, he explores the emergence of the disaster 𝐃𝐨𝐦𝐢𝐵 in Assam and of the antimonial, a group of drugs that were early products of modern chemotherapy. His cartographic analysis combines the concept of machinic assemblage by 𝐃𝐞𝐯 and Felix Guattari with feminist and post-colonial theories. In the frame of their joint research project, Materialities of Medical Culture in or between Europe and East Asia, he continues to inquire parasitological practices in southern China. This lecture asks how knowledge on wound disease, such as hookworm disease and schistosomiasis, unfold between different concepts of development, water and fluid encounters in early 20th century China. And it's time for the first speaker, Dr. Merdes. Applause.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Mu-Xing, for the introduction. And thank you for organizing the event. My talk today deals with the history of parasitological knowledge production in southern China. And my period is until the late 1920s, so I'm a little bit before Juyoung. And yeah, this parasitological knowledge production was connected to water and development in specific ways. And I will focus mainly on two diseases, schistosomiasis and hookworm, because these diseases became public health issues in China in the 1910s and 1920s. And yeah, I will map some relations between water development, worm diseases, also the population, scientists, missionaries, amongst others. And so I'm doing a kind of cartography. So that's how I understand cartography, not just the drawing of graphical map, but the mapping of relations. And that's also what some of the human parasitologists did. So first of all, I want to introduce some of the human agents of parasitological research in early 20th century China and late 19th century China. I have to mention that parasitology was one of the main pillars of so-called tropical medicine at the time. And in comparison to other areas of study of tropical medicine, the situation in China was very peculiar. So, because in other regions there was colonial medicine, doctors of colonial medicine doing the research. And in China we have the surgeons of the Imperial Maritime Customs Service. We have medical missionaries, which is really unusual. Then we have also in some parts colonial medicine in Taiwan. After 1895, the Japanese colonial medicine, also in Hong Kong. And then in the 1910s, also the Western educated Chinese doctors become more important and they begin to organize. And in the same period, philanthropic capital comes in. So we will see that. The human agents of parasitological knowledge production had different interests. So among these were monetary and social capital, for example, evangelical proselytation. So that the missionaries wanted to convince the people of the gospel. And also the more secular doctors, the kind of missionaries sometimes, because they also try to convince the people of Western medicine. Yes, some of the Asians were more committed to the state policies of their countries than others. And however, these interests were also bound to wider epistemic grids. For example, the missionaries, when they encountered the people, for example, the Aborigines in Taiwan, then sometimes they complained that the people had no concept for God. So God was not intelligible to them. So that's because this concept of God is dependent on wider epistemic grids. And the same applies to development and medicine. And that's why I think it's important to look with a post-colonial perspective at these histories. To exemplify this, I have a quotation of Alfred Cummings Reid, who was involved in bookform research. And he said, as the Chinese are essentially an unprogressive race whose summum bonum is to follow in their path their father's trot, bookworm disease cannot certainly be adjudged an agent which has inhibited social and mental development. So this first of all shows that development is not a universal concept. There were different ideas of development, and also that the hookworm disease was dependent on the concept of development. So today I would like to look at parasitological research from the water. So I structure my talk in three parts. First, water as a medium, then control of water, and in the third part I go a little bit beyond water and look at fluid relationship of parasitological research. So water as a medium, it was a medium of transport. It was a medium of research, and it was a source of infection, or a medium of the parasitic worms. So this is a map in which I marked the hospitals of the missionary associations that I studied. So, and then you can see that the missionaries, they came via the sea, and then when they spread inland, they also mostly used waterways. So this boat is the gospel boat of the English Presbyterian Church, and they used it to visit people, to preach, to heal them, and so on. And water was a medium of research. So this is very important person for history of so-called tropical medicine. Patrick Manson, and he did his research in Xiamen with his servant Juyoung Lee, and so his servant was infected with filaria worms, and he experimented with him and with mosquitoes. So this is the life cycle of filariasis as we know it today, and it's almost was what Manson described. So Manson didn't use such graphics, but in text form he almost described that cycle. So these are the stages of the worm within the human body. So the worm lives within the human body, reproduces within the human body, and then the larvae, they are in the blood. And mosquitoes via blood milk take up these larvae. And then the larvae go through different stages of their development within the mosquito. And then the mosquito takes another blood meal and can infect humans again. That's almost what Manson described, but he didn't have this step. So he thought that the mosquitoes, after taking up the larvae, that they die outside of the human body in the water. And then via drinking contaminated water, for example, humans can get infected. And that's why he did lots of research with water. And also some of his colleagues, like 𝐂𝐴, for example, in Kaohsiung in Taiwan. Yeah, and here I have to mention that this research was very important for the institutionalization of tropical medicine, because it was like a blueprint for Ronald Ross's malaria research in British India. And Ross described a life history of malaria. And of course this was a big public health issue and a big issue for colonial medicine at that time. And then Manson was also involved in the foundation of the London School of Tropical Medicine in 1899. And within this discourse of tropical medicine, so this discourse made like a differentiation between like normal disease and tropical diseases, which is very unusual classification of disease. And they also saw tropical disease as a bar to progress. So we have a concept of development here, a specific concept. So the filaria worms, they were not such a big public health issue in China. So there were Manson connected these worms to elephantiasis, for example, and other diseases, but this was not so such a big public health issues for the Westerners especially. But then bilharzia or schistosomiasis was, or it became a public health issue in the 1910s. And this is a worm which was first described in Egypt in the midst of the 19th century by Theodor Bilharz. And this is first of all a trematode. So the filaria are nematodes or roundworms. There are basically three classes of parasitic worms in humans of medical interest. Then we have the tapeworms or cestodes and the trematodes, or also called flukes. And most of the trematodes were like hermaphrodites. But this one, they differentiated two sexes. So this is the female worm, and in the ventral canal of the female worm is the male worm. And this worm affects the bladder. In the early 20th century, it was also found in East Asia. So first in Japan by 𝐾𝐶. And he connected this worm to the Katayama disease, which also was connected to water. So the local inhabitants, they had seen a connection to water before. And he also found some differences in comparison with the worm in Egypt. So mainly in the eggs. And shortly afterwards, it was also found in a coulee from Fujian and then in China. So mainly by the medical missionaries. And there it also coincided with some diseases already known. For example, we have the Yangtze fever, the river fever, and it was mainly found in the valleys of the Yangtze and its tributaries. Yeah, and symptoms were fever, enlargement of the liver and spleen, diarrhea. So the symptoms were also different from the symptoms in the Egyptian worm. So the people had suspected that there is a relation to water for a long time. And Japanese parasitology did lots of research in the 1910s, 1920s. So first of all, there were different hypotheses how this worm is transmitted. So some thought the infection occurs via drinking contaminated water. Some thought the worm goes directly through the skin. And some assumed that there is an intermediate host, like snails. And yeah, so in 1909, Akira Fujinami and Tachijiro Nakamura did experiment with cows. So here this is a picture of these experiments. So they put these cows in water, and some had like kind of roots and others not. And so they demonstrated that the infection goes directly through the skin. And then later, in 1913, Miyari and Suzuki identified Xanthoria nosocola, so that's a snail, as intermediate host of that disease. Yeah, and in these years there was actually a lot of research on trematodes and lots of research in the water. So this is one of the earliest life histories of a fluke. So this is the liver fluke. And I just told you that most of the trematodes are hermaphrodites. So these flukes look like this. These are the adult worms. And these worms have two very characteristic larvae, the Merdes and the 𝐃𝐶𝐬𝐢𝐤. And so this fluke mainly lives in the sheep, then it reproduces in the sheep, lays eggs. The eggs are excreted with the feces, then larvae, the Merdes hatch from the eggs, and these Merdes infect snails. Within the snail, they develop into 𝐃𝐶𝐬𝐢𝐤, which encysts onto plants. And then the plants are eaten by the sheep, and so they're infected. This cycle was described in 1880. So again, they didn't use such a graphic, but rather in text form. And there was lots of research, and one very prominent example is Koa Nakagawa, who did his research on Pelargonimus westermani in Taiwan, so in the area around Hsinchu. And what he demonstrated actually was a very new kind of life history. So that's not exactly the life history of Pelargonimus westermani, but just to demonstrate. So he found that we have also the first intermediate host here, the snail, and then this second one was also an animal, the crabs. And to reach that conclusion, he did numerous experiments within the water, so in all kinds of directions, and it was not very targeted research. And Lee and Atkinson, these are also some parasitologists, called such a method the blunderbuss method. Another fluke, so also looks similar as the other flukes, is Parasitological, Parasitologist Buski. And here we have a medical missionary who described the life history for the humans of this world. So actually Nakagawa described it for animals, for the pigs, and he described it for humans in Shaoxing. And so he found the snail intermediate host. He did lots of experiments also, and what he did, he directly observed the development of the Merdes within the snail. So that's the snail he identified as intermediate host. And the shell of the snail was very transparent. So he put the snail under the microscope and could directly observe how the larvae developed within the snails. And the position of the second intermediate host, or the transmitter, is taken here again by plants, by water plants, watermud and water chestnut. And so these were eaten raw, so it was easy to get infected by these plants. And Barno also claimed that Fasciolopsiasis is a big public health issue, and he said that it's more dangerous than hookworm and schistosomiasis together. However, it was not such a big public health issue as schistosomiasis, for example. So the attempts to try to control the water, that's the next point, they concentrated on diseases like schistosomiasis and hookworm. I will start with schistosomiasis. So, there were different therapeutic options in worm disease, also in schistosomiasis, and I call this like a therapeutic field, where we have different options like preventive measures or drug therapy, for example, and they have different shares, so you can compare this. For example, schistosomiasis in Egypt after 1915 was mainly treated with drugs, but in China it was not so important, for example. So this is from a dissertation of Ernest Pi, who was a medical missionary, and he had begun very early to study the disease. And these are the measures that he suggested to contain the disease. So it's from 1915. So he suggested to warn the endangered person, so to avoid the contact with contaminated water. Then also to use or to build dry earth latrines in endemic regions to avoid what was called wild defecation, so that the feces comes into water, for example. They wanted to avoid this. Another option was the destruction of animals, in which the worms also lived. And what's interesting is that he found that bigger educational campaigns were redundant. And as he explains this, for the present, the authorities are as ignorant on the subject as the people. Yes, and in this therapeutic field, there is like an important change around 1915, after 1915, because then chemotherapeutical drugs came up. So that's the Dr. Alex magic bullet from a Hollywood movie. And so chemotherapeutical drugs at that time were drugs against infectious diseases. There were also some against schistosomiasis. And I have studied these drugs very well because they were also used against 𝐃𝐸 disease. And first, they used tartar emetic and in schistosomiasis, and later, for example, drugs like Fuadi, which was developed by some German companies, amongst others by Bayer. But interestingly, when we look at another kind of cartography of schistosomiasis from around 1925, these drugs became not so important as in Egypt. So in Egypt, they did mass treatments with these drugs. And this is from another study published in 1924 by Ernest Faust and Henry Edmund Melanie. They were from the Beijing Union Medical College. And this study was also supported by the Rockefeller Foundation. And actually, they divided the therapeutic field according to the different stages of the life history of the worms. So, they also, of course, identified snails as intermediate hosts. So there were different snails in China than in Japan. Then they also sent around questionnaires, and they did all kinds of experiments. In the background, you can see some graphical maps that they drew. So they looked for snails everywhere and studied it very exactly. So, and for the first stage of the life history of schistosomiasis, when the schistosomes are within the body of the definite host, so of the human, there were two options. So the killing of animals, so the other animals that were affected by schistosome, and the pharmacotherapy. And interestingly, they saw the pharmacotherapy not so much as an end in itself, but as a kind of therapeutic prophylaxis. So as they wrote, successful treatment of the disease would also be a potent factor in the education of the people by gaining their confidence in the advice given and cooperation in the carrying out of preventive measures. So they hope to be able to implement preventive measures via drug therapy. Of course, the problem with drug therapy was always that the people were often subjected to reinfection. So it's very likely that they get reinfected due to their daily life. And in the second stage, when the schistosomes had left the body, they recommended stool hygiene, also education of the farmers again, and the control of feces. So feces was used as a manure on the fields. And these are vessels in which the farmers and others kept the feces and then to distribute it on the fields. And as in other borne diseases, they suggested just to use maybe one more or a few more of these cans of these vessels and to store the feces for a longer period. Because when it is stored for a longer period, the larvae and also the eggs will die. Yes, and here you can also see another image from the book. That's a drop of water in which the which shows the movement of the Merdes within the water. And a third stage was within the snail. The destruction of snails was an option. In Japan, they did that, so they destroyed snails with lime, and also they tried with copper sulfate, but they thought it's not such a good idea for China for different reasons. And the fourth one is the control of the free-swimming 𝐃𝐶arcaria. And here they recommended the disinfection of drinking water, also the storage of drinking water, and again the prevention, so to warn people of the contact with contaminated water, or maybe advise them to wear protective gear. However, it was not easy for them to implement their plans, and there were two main obstacles that are described. So first is what I would call epistemic incompatibilities, and what they called ignorance and superstition. And the second is a lack of government. So they had no government that could support them. And there was a very strong desire for state power among the parasitologists. So Forst and Melanie write, if this disease were present in a scientifically enlightened country with an efficient government, it would be feasible to eradicate it from even such a vast area within a few years. Okay, that's my second example, the hookworm. So hookworm became an issue of public health in China in the 1910s, or around 1910. And at that time, it was already a public health issue in Europe and on colonial plantations, and also in the southern states of the US. So in 1880, it had been described as the cause of a kind of anemia that affected workers who built the Gotthard tunnel through the Alps. And this was also a disease connected to ideas of development. So in the US, where the Rockefeller Foundation did a big anti-hookworm campaign, they called the hookworm also lazy bug. So there was the assumption that worm somehow causes people to be lazy and to be less productive. And in China, there were some hookworm studies in the coal mines of Pingshan, which is here at the border of the provinces of Hunan and Jiangxi. As this is again life cycle from today for the hookworm. So it also lives within the human body, then it reproduces, lays eggs, the eggs are excreted as the feces, the larvae hatch, and then the larvae go directly through the skin. So there is no intermediate host, but they go directly through the skin. And in the surroundings where it's hot, humid, and the hygienic conditions are not good, there it's likely that this worm can thrive. And for example, it was also a problem in coal mines in Western Europe, because there were often no toilets in the mines. So, and in China, the hookworm program was initiated again by medical missionaries of Changsha. For example, 𝐃𝐸𝐦𝐢𝐧𝐢, a medical missionary, initiated this. But this is around early 1910s, and at that time, the influence of the missionaries in parasitological research also wanes. So they collaborated with the Rockefeller Foundation, who sponsored this research. Then also Chinese institutions come in. So, and the medical missionaries become less important, whereas in the first 2 decades, or until then, they were like the main agents of parasitological research in most parts of China. And there were basically 2 studies, one by 𝐼𝐴 and one by Wen-Hua. And yeah, I should mention that this study did not result from an urgent health problem from the coal mines, but rather from the experience made in other regions. So they tried to implement a kind of plan of development. And these coal mines belong to the Hanyu Iron and Coal Co., a Chinese company founded by Zhang Shuanghai. And they also employed German engineers, for example, Gustav Leim, who prospected for coal for Zhang. And they also imported the machinery from Germany, like the electric trains. Yes, and there is lots of research from Jeff Honeybrook on this environment, and like the advent of these industrialized coal mining, very interesting. And in the beginning also, the company was not so much interested in these hookworm programs. And also the attitude of Reed, who did the first study, was towards the Hanyu Iron and Coal Co., was very ambitious. So that's what he said about this commercial development of the mineral resources, not to mention the social and economic welfare of the inhabitants, will suffer severe damage if practical measures are not taken from the first to combat hookworm infection in this locality. So he felt that there were not only good developments coming with the industrialized development, but also there were some bad effects, and he hoped to contain these negative effects with future hookworm campaigns. When Wen-Hua began his study in 1917, the Pingshan colliery employed around 12,000 workers, and they produced around 100,000 tons of coal and 250,000 tons of coke each year. And what Yen did is kind of a cartography. So he mapped all the relations between the hookworm and different levels of the mines. For example, the general layout of the mine, the employment structure, the ventilation, the underground working conditions, the water supply, the sewage, the latrines, bathrooms, the accommodation of the workers, and the infection rates. And for today, one very interesting map is the water map. So he analyzed how the water gets into the mines, and then he found that there were like native mines also in this area, and that he found that this is like the source of infection. So here you can read in Honeybrook's book about how they used the inhabitants of Pingshan used these mines for subsistence before, and how they also tried to resist the industrialization of the mines. And yes, he thought that these mines were ideal breeding ground for the hookworm. So these mines were not so deep as the industrialized mines. They were rather shallow. And I guess and then he thought that the water finds its way from these mines to the industrialized mines. However, in the industrialized mines, the situation was not much better actually. So he again said that these shafts in the industrial mines were so infectious that sometimes a single sitting on the wet ground will give characteristic symptoms of groundage on that part of the body coming in contact with the wet cloth. So even if the people came to that mines only for a very short time, they could get infected, and this groundage was like a first symptom, like a rash at the point of entrance of the wounds. Yeah, and he supported his findings with stool examinations. And here we have a very interesting parasitological technique which was used by the medical missionaries before. So there were some medical missionaries, for example, 𝐃𝐚𝐧𝐢𝐤 Jr. in Taiwan, and they were familiar with parasitological techniques, and they used the China Medical Missionary Association to do some large-scale research. So this is a worm map that they shared with all the medical missionaries in the hospitals. So worm infection can be detected mostly by worm eggs in the feces. So these are the worm eggs. They are comparatively big, and there was no staining needed to see these worm eggs under the microscope. So for example, in malaria it was much more difficult to identify the parasites. And by these stool examinations, the missionaries, they did also graphical worm maps. So this is a worm map for hookworm. And here where these double crossed areas are, they assume that the infection rate is very high and the disease is prevalent there. So also Taiwan was very infected according to this. And Jan also did stool examinations, and he determined that there is an infection rate in the mines of 49.8%, and underground it's much higher, 85.1%. And the International Health Board of the Rockefeller Foundation, they did a draft for a hookworm campaign on the basis of Jan's study. And these are the measures they suggested. So the education of the workers via posters, for example, then the systematic examination and treatment of workers. So that's also measures that were used on colonial plantation and in Western Europe, European coal mines. The improvement of the water supply and sanitary infrastructure, the punishment of wild defecation, and then they established also a sanitary department for further research, which should be run by the company later. However, on the one hand, it seemed to be possible to control hookworm, the workers, and even the fluid water that goes through the small porous cracks into the mines, to the native mines, to the industrialized mines. On the other hand, there were also flows that evaded categorization and survey, like the mobility of the workers. So the workers, they often change the working groups. And then also some of the workers evaded treatment. In the beginning, they handed out the treatment to the workers to take it at home. But then they gave it to them in a hospital. They established a hospital. But even in the hospital, the workers tried to spit out the medication occasionally. And there was agitation against the hookworm treatment and even riots. And also the stools of the police officers, they couldn't be monitored as desired. So what the parasitologists wrote is that they suspected that the police officers handed in the stools of their prisoners instead of their own. But despite these drawbacks, in 1920, Yen considered the study to be a success, and he said that the infection rate decreased from 81.6% to 39.5%. Okay, so that's the shortest chapter of this talk. If do we have some minutes? Is it good time?
Yeah, 5.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, fluidity beyond water. So water was not the only fluid element in this parasitological assemblages. Also, the research processes were dependent on fluid encounters and also on Chinese knowledge, which didn't obey the rules of the discourse of parasitology. One example is the further hookworm research of the China Hookworm Commission. So I showed the map of the missionaries who assumed that there are huge areas of China where hookworm is a public health issue. And this Hookworm Commission in the 1920s found that hookworm is only a problem in specific working conditions, and mainly on the mulberry plantations. So because they use specific manuring techniques on these mulberry plantations, it was like a source of infection. However, these findings that made the hookworm map shrunk somehow, these were informed by workers from the mulberry plantations. And they told the medical missionary William Hector Park about diseases like these two, the Sangyang and Park identified these diseases as hookworm disease. And he said that we know more about the hookworm nowadays than do the Chinese people. But I have recently found out that they probably knew something of the hookworm condition and of how the parasite enters the body before we knew anything about it at all. So this indicates that there was also knowledge by the Chinese people that they didn't consider for their study voluntarily, but somehow it came in and very much informed the findings of this Hookworm Commission. Then we have another study of W.S. Zhou, who did some study in the antimony mines, the sheep function, the antimony mountain. He came also from Changsha, so he was associated with the other research who did research in Pingshan. But the mines that he analyzed were quite different. So it was rather a smooth knowledge space, and Zhou observed that there are several hundred working groups that mined in all directions. So not one big company that controlled everything, but several working groups. And he wrote that the mines run zigzag directions following the vein of the ore, with an inclination of not more than 20 feet downward and forward. So we have also, again, rather shallow mines. And Zhou's cartography was like these mines more nomadic. He also did a water map, but he didn't analyze the water with chemical methods, as in Pingshan. He tasted the water and he drank it. He even developed a diary because of that. And then he tried to reach the local community by opening a dispensary. So in his dispensary at the mines, he treated all kinds of diseases, and he treated also all kinds of people, not only the workers. And he told the people that it's necessary to give him their stools for the treatment. So regardless of the disease, he just deceived them somehow to get the stools. And that way he was able to do 210 examinations and found a surprisingly low infection rate among the miners of 6.35%. And the main source of infection was identified in the farmers with 70%. So in this case, in the end, actually suggested similar measures as in 𝐃𝐸𝐴, but the way he got there was quite different, and he had to follow the lines. He couldn't just apply his research to it, and it was more fluid than in 𝐃𝐸𝐴. So, to conclude, I have looked at the parasitological research from the perspective of water today, and water was a medium of transport, and it was a medium of research. It was a medium for the norms, a medium of infection also. So this research was dependent on water. That's why they tried to control water. In schistosomiasis in these years, so again my research period is until the end of the 1920s. There was a lack of government support to implement measures against schistosomiasis, large-scale measures. However, in the disciplinary regime of the coal mines, it was possible to a certain extent to control that disease, the hookworm disease. And in the third part, I have tried to show that research was dependent on fluid encounters, also on Chinese knowledge. It was also actually dependent on subconscious research processes, but I didn't elaborate on that point today. And what we've also seen is that the plans of development of the agents involved, as well as impressive therapeutic effects, so that were shown otherwhere, like in Egypt, for example, were dependent on required certain relationships and means of production. So first of all, like a police, military apparatus who could implement large-scale measures, or work regimes, as in 𝐃𝐸𝐴. And the reproduction of imperial frames, including parasitological knowledge frames. These accounts of development were not universal accounts of development, can be seen by the fact that they neglected social structures in the studies, for example. And this story also supports 𝐃𝐸𝐴𝐬𝐬𝒂𝒏'𝒔's thesis that the undemocratic foundations of democracy are incorporated somehow in this period of medical history. Yes. Thank you very much for listening.